There's so much that's so frustrating and broken about national politics today. But let's remember, the road to renewal begins right here at home. It begins with being a good neighbor, a powerful neighbor, an engaged neighbor. What does it mean to be a neighbor who exercises power? Let's find out.
Let us now make our voices heard. I pledge to serve and to push my country. I pledge to live like a citizen.
Welcome to Citizen University TV. I'm Eric Liu. On this show all season long, we've been looking at the question, what is civics? And we define civics a very simple way. It is the art of being a pro-social, problem-solving contributor in a self-governing community. All three of those elements are important: pro-social, problem-solving, and self-governing. Over the arc of the season, we've been looking at different ways to practice civics in the life of our city, whether that is getting local government to do what you want it to do, doing community organizing wherever you may live, or even running for office. But though those things may seem political, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is something that undergirds all these forms of civics, and that is the power of neighbors, activating neighbor power wherever in the city you may live. As we know, right now, Seattle is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, and with that growth comes this explosion of opportunity, but also this fraying of the social fabric. Seattle has always liked to think of itself as a city of neighborhoods, but when you have this kind of growth and the kind of inequality and change that's come with it, the question arises, what does it mean to be a city of neighborhood? What does it mean to actually be a neighbor to somebody else? And that question is one that is really, again, we feel it in our bones, but we can also see it in statistics that something is changing. According to the National Conference on Citizenship and Seattle City Club, they've been doing this research that tracks neighborliness and social cohesion in cities around the United States. And Seattle actually, in many cases, ranks below average on questions of, do we do favors for neighbors? 50%. Trusting people in your neighborhood? 59%. And talking with neighbors? 47%. Now, in the national scheme of things, we rank about middle of the pack. But imagine for a moment what it would look like if each of these numbers was 20 percentage points higher. If 3 out of 4 of us was doing favors for neighbors, trusting our neighbors, and actually talking with our neighbors. That direction, that trend toward disengagement is something that is deeply, deeply concerning to all of us who live in this rapidly changing city. Well, one of the things that we think about now is not just Seattle, but the fact of neighborliness in the United States in general. This same theme has been arising in ways that people are feeling again in ways that are cultural, economic, and political. And you see it in phenomena like the huge success of this recent documentary about Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, who embodied this old school notion of neighborliness, and people have a sense of nostalgia about that. But you have people across the left and the right. The Nebraska Republican Senator Ben Sasse has written a book and recently given a bunch of speeches about the ways in which the hyperpartisanship and polarization of our national politics is fueled in great measure by loneliness and isolation and a breakdown of a sense of neighborliness. So all these trends aren't just happening in fast-growing Seattle, they're in our country right now. And the question is, what can we do about them? How can we rebuild that spirit of old Mr. Rogers' neighborliness? Well, here today we want to talk about 4 things that we can do in the life of Seattle. First, know your neighbors. Second, simply ask for help. Third, do things together. And fourth, cross-pollinate. Now I want to spend a moment talking about each one of these things. Knowing your neighbors. Now this seems so obvious, but let's ask ourselves, do you in fact know your neighbors? Wherever you may live in this city, do you know the people around you? Do you know their names? Do you know their families? Do you know the things that they do, the things that they care about? Chances are the answer is no. And as we have so many newcomers here who don't know each other, much less know people who've been longtime residents in the city, that sense of fraying is something that becomes self-fulfilling. Now, there are ways that we can actually address this. Every year there's a Seattle Night Out in the summer that invites people to organize block parties all around the city with music and fun and things that give a spirit of celebration to your, not even your neighborhood, but your micro neighborhood, your block and your particular part of a community. There are national phenomena like Queer Soup Night that started in Brooklyn but are now happening all around the United States, including in Seattle, that are inviting people around a particular affinity, identity, to come together and meet their neighbors and come find new ways to build social cohesion and social capital where they may live. Well, that idea of simply knowing your neighbors then tees up the second notion of what it means for us to activate neighbor power, and this is this: asking for help. Now again, this seems so elementary, and again I ask you, when was the last time you asked someone for help? When was the last time you actually looked to a neighbor and said, hey, I need help doing fill in the blank? It could be something mundane, like getting a load of compost up the steps. Or it could be something much more complicated, like how do we deal with the fact that there's homelessness a block away from us right now, and we have these competing impulses toward compassion and yet worry about the safety of the neighborhood. Asking for help is something that we've got to recultivate as a habit. And there are all kinds of ways in which in our city we are actually inviting people to ask for help. In Beacon Hill's food forest, you have an environment here right now where food is grown by the community and it is open to all. So people who may have a need for higher nutrition, freshly grown food can ask for help, can have an opportunity actually to get that food that's grown locally in their neighborhood. But even beyond simple formal programs like that, I cannot underscore how much in our age of broken politics and mistrust everywhere we look, that simple human act of turning to somebody and saying, can I ask you for a favor, actually sets in motion a positive feedback loop. It actually does them a favor because it gives them an invitation to get out of their own isolation and to participate in the life that we built together in community. Well, this brings me to the third thing that we can talk about here, and that is simply doing things together. Again, not rocket science, but the doing of things together. That not just knowing your neighbors, not just on an occasion, whether it's asking for the proverbial cup of sugar or something else like that, asking for help, but actually saying, hey, let's organize together, let's clean up something. You look all around our city, there are efforts to clean up and refurbish playgrounds and build parks and so forth. But also beyond that, there is the work of actually addressing a common problem in a community. Where I live in Madrona, a group of neighbors have come together because we've had a bad actor developer building a horrible project there that the city has had a struggle trying to contain them and getting them to follow the rules. And you realize it can't just be on the city alone. Neighbors together have to organize and create a sense of, hey, we're going to do something together here. But whether it's about solving a problem or actually trying to build something affirmative, that idea of collective action builds trust in a neighborhood. You have programs all around the city, thanks to the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods, to enable neighbors to adopt a street, adopt a block, adopt a part of a neighborhood for cleanups. You have this in the University District, all over the city. And this map here shows different blocks in which community residents have decided to take ownership, literally, of the problem, of the cleanness or the lack of cleanliness in that neighborhood. Take ownership of the caliber and quality of life in that neighborhood. That's something that we've got to commit to doing with each other. And again, it's not rocket science, but in some ways, it's harder because it requires us to say, I'm not just going to stay in my own little rut by myself. I'm going to say to this person who lives over here, this person who lives over there, hey, can we do something together? Well, finally, that brings me to this idea of cross-pollination. One of the dangers of activating neighbor power in any city, but especially in a city like ours, is that you only focus on your neighborhood and you focus on preserving, protecting what's good in your neighborhood to the exclusion of people outside. And that can lead to a kind of practice of NIMBYism. It can lead to a practice of selfishness and hoarding within a neighborhood. And so one of the most basic other things that we get to do as citizens is to cross-pollinate and to circulate our relationships, our capital, our understanding. That means serving in another part of the city and getting to know people, whether it's at a food bank, a soup kitchen, whatever it might be. That means actually asking ourselves, as this chart did at a community gathering in Beacon Hill, what other parts of the city have you called home? Can we actually draw and make visible the connections that we, even who live right here in this part of town, have to other parts of town? There was a move afoot a few years ago to create something called sister neighborhoods, akin to the way that you have sister cities between Seattle and Kobe, Japan, or someplace in Germany. But how about having sister neighborhoods between Ballard and South Park, between Queen Anne and Beacon Hill, where people actually commit to getting to know each other and finding bonds of commonality and experience and shared experience across those lines of neighborhood. Cross-pollinating our knowledge, our skills, our joys, our talents, that's got to be part of the work as well. Well, this work of building on and activating the power of neighbors is so present in everything we do, but we want to give you one concrete story of a group of neighbors who, for many years now, have been doing cleanup work at the Duwamish River and watching the ways in which, as they do that cleanup work, they build social cohesion and activate the power of neighbors.
Everybody had polluted the poor old Duwamish.
We are supplying the double kayaks that were trailered over from Alki Kayak Tours, and the volunteers here will be able to hop in those and go collect the garbage.
I was on the kayak. It was like my first time, so it's like I was scared.
We used to see pickup trucks sitting in the water. Used to see all kinds of metal debris. Used to see much more garbage.
And we volunteers are doing our little bit.
It's my first year joining like a organization or a volunteering group, and I like it so far because like you can help your community, you can help yourself too.
I worked for NASA. I had a period where I wanted to know the meaning of life, and I decided that I had to make my own meaning. And one of the things I decided I had to do was give to the community. I was on a 24-hour crisis phone line. I volunteer with the Burien Library Guild. I have volunteered with a food bank, and you learn about the homeless. You learn about the people who don't have enough food to eat. And I was actually at a Duwamish Alive event. I listened to two of the speakers from the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. I said, these people are people I can really relate to. I want to work with them. There's two main activities. One is getting the trash out of the river.
We saw like tires and like plastic bags.
Paint can.
Keeping up with it is the important thing, and having, you know, volunteers and individuals that are passionate about doing it.
And the other group of people is planting plants all throughout this area of the park.
When I was in kayaking, I volunteered to like just help plant.
Just digging in the dirt, pulling up blackberries, removing ivy. You can see that you've achieved something, and it really is very rewarding.
It's a lot of work. There's outdoor weather conditions, lifting, trailering, all that kind of thing, but it feels good.
There's a lot of work still to be done, but in places the work is actually achieving what we're aiming for. It's restoring the native plants, and it really is astounding to see that sort of difference being made.
It made me feel like we could come here more often and like pick them up when we get better at kayaking.
It takes a community, it takes the individuals to do this, and without the volunteers there just wouldn't be enough momentum to get things done.
There's that one story of like one starfish at a time, if you save. So I mean, we have to do something.
One day when I grow up, I'll have my own organization and more youth would come and help the community.
Get out there, do something, and things will improve.
To talk with us some more about the idea of neighbor power, we're joined by Sarah Morningstar, who's the Deputy Director of the city's Department of Neighborhoods. And Sarah, welcome.
Good morning.
We've known each other for a while because in a prior life you were an assistant principal.
I was.
At TOPS K-8 school in Seattle. And we were talking before the cameras rolled about the similarities, in a way, between leading a building and leading a department of the city that is reaching and touching all different kinds of people in community.
It's pretty similar.
What are the things that you feel like you've learned about how to build trust in community from the first part of your career that you're applying now in this domain?
That's a great question. I think anytime we are charged with making our communities a better place, it's really about who am I in relationship to the people that I'm serving. And in both contexts, it was about I'm just a piece of this story, and I may have the positionality to help get things done, but really my job is to lift up whomever I can to lead in their own way and to provide voice in the communities. And it was the same in the schools, really.
This idea of lifting up, I think a lot of folks have heard of the Department of Neighborhoods, but maybe not have a really clear picture beyond something like pea patches
Right, exactly.
and the rest, what the department does. So that framing that you just used of, you're not there in a top-down way to tell neighborhoods what to do. You're there to actually give lift to or voice to ideas that are emerging from different parts of the community. Explain how that actually works in practice.
In practice, we are sort of the eyes and ears of the neighborhoods. And whether it's our community engagement coordinators or the leader of our PACE program, which is our People's Academy for Community Engagement, not unlike your own, or if it's our P-Patch coordinators, our matching fund folks, our historic preservation officers, everybody that comes to work on the floor is of service to the people in the communities. And we are out there at the meetings proactively, and I think that that's an important piece, proactively reaching out and bringing people to the table and finding those folks that are underserved and not historically listened to and saying, you have a voice, you get this voice, let's help make that happen.
So that point in particular is really important in a city that is so rapidly growing, so rapidly becoming rapidly more unequal in different ways.
Correct.
That point about affirmatively reaching out to people whose voices might not be heard or who might not have a seat at the table. The nature of neighborhood work, nature of politics in general is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? How do you actually, what does it look like to invite people who aren't making squeaky noises, who don't even know how to squeak and get heard to do that? And in some ways, aren't you making the city's job harder by making more people more able to express how they're ticked off with the city?
Right. Well, that's one way to look at it, but I think too it's, I know that this administration is wanting us to do this work, and Mayor Durkin and her team have said, no, Department of Neighborhoods, this is what we want you to do. And it's just a matter of truly taking, the staff, and Andreas and I have amazing staff, and they're the ones that go out and do this work day in and day out and come back and share it with us. But they are the ones that go out into communities like Chinatown International District or parts of Ballard or the central area, the Duwamish River area, and they go out and they say, hey, do you even know that this is happening? And they go door to door and they find those community leaders and they help bring everybody to the table. This is about not, how many seats do we have at the table, but how many tables are we going to need so that everybody can sit down. And sure, there are times when there is a history of just box checking in terms of community engagement. Did we put out a flyer? Did we hang the poster up about the repaving project? Check. But we need to slow that down sometimes and say, hey, wait, there's communities that live here that need to know about this. And so we do work with other departments in the city to get that outreach done. How
do you actually, in a city, again, that's so rapidly changing, newcomers to the city might develop some attachment to the particular neighborhood where they live, especially if they've got kids there and they're getting woven into the community that way. But they might not necessarily know much about other neighborhoods in town or the relationship or the history of other neighborhoods in town. What do you all do at the department to try to cross-pollinate ideas, history, voices, culture across neighborhoods and between them among the city?
That's a great question. For us, it's really a matter of intentionality and truly just sharing stories, whether it's matching funds bringing people together or historic preservation connecting this neighborhood with another one that's really good at preserving all of their homes, and saying, hey, can you help out this community? They're doing this for the first time. Or it's our community engagement coordinators who work with anyone and everyone at the community council meetings. We truly just, one connection at a time, connect the city together.
So I guess one of the things that strikes me, there's one layer of the work of activating neighbor power that is just about happy power, just do stuff together, do more. And then there's another layer that's about unhappy power.
Right.
Whether it's complaint or grievance or dissatisfaction with the nature of changes that are happening. And that can be in the Central District or South Seattle, the feeling of displacement that's been happening and gentrification. That can be in North Seattle, the fears and concerns that have been raised about homelessness and the impacts on, or about density and the impacts there on the traditional character of neighborhoods. And there's not just neighbor activism, neighbor power in terms of, hey, let's plant a pea patch together, but like, hey, we don't like what's happening here and we need to change that. What kind of crosswalks do you all try to build between the relatively apolitical forms of neighbor engagement and the more power-oriented, conflict-centered kinds of neighbor engagement?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that all ways of engaging with your government are good and should be encouraged. And it's actually quite surprising to see when sort of cultivated and stewarded, how we've been able to actually use those pea patch communities. That's a great example that you didn't know you were giving me. Use those pea patch communities as sort of starting points and information places because they have their own networks. And so they are our community leaders, whether they knew it or not when they signed up for a plot. And one such example up north was a situation where we did have a homeless encampment, an unauthorized one, I guess I should say, next to a pea patch. And sort of the tension there, almost as a analogy to the city in general, what that looked like. But how our community, one of our CECs, reached out to
community engagement coordinators.
Thank you. I've already slipped into using just acronyms. Our community engagement coordinator reached out to another staffer who was in charge of the neighboring pea patch, and the two of them as staff figured out how to have these two communities talk to each other. And it ended up, it was the middle of summer and there was questions about water use, and it turned out to actually be a pretty positive situation where the pea patch community was able to provide water and things for the neighboring encampment as the city figured out what to do about it. But the crosswalks, as you say, are really about, it's really about empowerment. I mean, it seems like an overly used word, but it's so important to acknowledge that people are going to have feelings about their local government and have that be okay, right? It's okay. And then how do we teach and inspire to appropriately and constructively address those concerns?
Well, at the heart of that kind of empowerment is trust. And the anecdote you just shared is about building relationships of trust. And I think most fundamentally, as the city grows, people understanding that there's trust to be built also between the citizens and government itself, in the form, in this case, of the Department of Neighborhoods. So thank you for coming to share with us a bit about how you all approach your work and how people can plug in and claim the power that's inherent in the work that you do. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
My guest has been Sarah Morningstar. She's the Deputy Director of the city's Department of Neighborhoods, and you can learn more about them on their website and about the work that they're doing all around the city of Seattle. Neighbor power matters. We've been hearing that all episode today, and we've been exploring 4 different ways to do that. In the first place, know your neighbors, rehumanize the people who live around you. In the second place, ask for help. By asking for help, you help others, and you set in motion a positive feedback loop. Third, do things together. Find ways to fix, to build, to play, to solve, to create together in your community. And finally, cross-pollinate. Make sure that all that social capital you're generating by knowing your neighbors doesn't get hoarded and kept just where you live. Circulate it around the city. Get to know people in other neighborhoods and stitch together that sense of shared fate across our city. That's what it means not only to live like a neighbor in a Mr. Rogers sense, but what it means to live like a citizen and to reactivate a spirit of citizenship in our country. Well, every episode, we love to take questions from you that come in on social media, and we've got a couple of great ones today. First one comes in from Nathan on Facebook. What does it mean to be bipartisan in 2018? Of course, the question is about the backdrop of hyperpartisanship and tribalism in our politics today. And what I would say is this, that just because of that backdrop, we can't simply worship bipartisanship for its own sake. The point isn't bipartisanship as a label. The point is, are we fixing things? Are we solving problems? And in doing so, are we taking ideas wherever they may come from, from the left, from the right, from Republicans, from Democrats. We have challenges in our city and our country right now that cannot be solved only by the answers of one side. What it means to actually think creatively and openly about solving things together, that's the emphasis. If you earn the label bipartisan, great. But the point is to fix stuff right now in our country. The second question comes from Patty, also on Facebook, and it's a really important one. How do we cultivate active citizenship in children when they don't trust the system or the news? And I think the key here is the word system. The system is a vast, distant thing. But where we live in community and in place is about recognizing that we decide everything around us. Take a walk with the children in your life, around your neighborhood, around your block. Ask why this park hasn't been cleaned up. Ask why the waits at this bus stop are so long. Ask why this school is being scheduled for closure and not another one. When you ask those questions and pull on that thread, you realize there isn't some distant system that's deciding this stuff. It's us. And it depends on whether we show up in our lives. That's a way to take ownership of our community, but also to break through the walls of mistrust that are forming in our politics, to remember that we can claim the responsibility to answer these questions. Well, that's been the spirit of our show altogether on Citizen University TV, the spirit of claiming power, claiming voice, and recognizing that what it means to live like a citizen is to couple this knowledge of power with a sense of spirit and community and neighborliness that is about character and what we build together. I'm Eric Liu. Thanks for watching Citizen University TV, and join us for a future episode.